Thank you, Nancy. And thank you, Dr. Miller and Dr. Prather, for building a pretty good foundation for us on how these viruses are transmitted and how we can deal with them indoors. My personal and my company connection to this whole topic is, like Nancy said, we've been engineering clean air in the dental industry for over 35 years as a company, and we just wanted to see if we can facilitate some of the change we think needs to happen. So next slide. Next slide. Probably one more. Thank you. So there's a lot of noise and misinformation, and I think Dr. Miller and Prather cut through a lot of that already, and so that's really good. I think the challenge is how we take that and apply it to the dental industry and make effective change. I think we can. I think we need to start making some targets. If we don't have a goal, we're never going to get there. So I think we need to make those goals, and as an industry, start figuring out how to make change. So I'm going to try to simplify some of it for the dental offices and see if we can't end up with a to-do list and some simple steps we need to take. So if you've been in the industry a long time, you probably were around when gloves weren't required, and some people, a few people wore them all the time, and then there were some early adopters, then there were late adopters, and then pretty soon it became standard. Another more recent example of that is our water lines in the dental office. There were not a lot of good products to treat the water systems, but once the mandates were in place and we had a requirement that we had to hit, the manufacturers backfilled with products to meet those standards, and now it's the standard. That's what we do in all of our offices. So this is an example of how we move forward and not backward in the industry. And I think, unfortunately, we're a little slow on some things, and this is one of them here with these. You know, as the pandemic unfolded, I think we have to play catch up now. So I love what Dr. Molinari said about this topic and in infection control. Dentistry previously responded to contact precautions, gloves, and droplet precautions, masks, and so now we have to deal with the smaller particles. And so what should become the new standard for that in the dental office? And so that's really the question. Next slide. So if this was your home and you walked into this scene after you got past the shock of a scene like this or a problem like this and how cute the kids were, what do you do next? Well, what you shouldn't do or what you don't do is grab a mop and a bucket and try to clean up the water. What you do is you find the source. Where's it coming from? What caused the problem? How do I stop it and keep it from happening again? And so this is how we feel that we need to frame the problem in the dental industry. And in this slide, the source is the mystery. In the dental office, it's not, it's us. I like the AGP term that we were introduced to today. I think it's half a joke, but might become real. And because we're the source, the humans. And in the dental office, the mask, all the staff and everyone in the office can wear masks until you get to the point where the patient needs to be treated. And we need access to their mouth, so they can't wear a mask. So we think that's the #1 problem area. So that's where we need to start. So that's the source in this condition. Next slide. So the goal as we see it is to contain aerosols as much as possible and as close to the source as possible. So the term here is source capture. That may be new to some. Probably everyone's familiar now with on the heels of this pandemic, excuse me. So going back to our household flood metaphor, the goal is to stop or minimize it at the source so we don't have to deal with it on a wider scale. And so we have 2 known ways to deal with that. And one is HVE, which we're all familiar with. And now we're all familiar with extraoral suction. So it turns out HVE is really good at intraoral targeting. It's very small and it covers a very small area, but it also, in our testing shows that it does better on larger droplets than on aerosols. And extraoral suction, while large by comparison, is still covering a small area at the patient's face or mouth. It's much more effective on aerosols. And so at this point, this was the question: how effective are these methods, and are these good? This is what we were doing during the pandemic. So is this what we need to be doing moving forward? So we commissioned a pilot study with dental advisors to test this, to measure the difference and effectiveness of these alternative methods in the dental office and patient care. And so we did this by sampling at 2 locations. I'm embarrassed to say there are acetylene trays, which aren't totally invalid for a comparative measure, but we got good advice on the experiment design, and we're using aerosol impactor, which is that yellow thing there in the picture there. And basically what it does is it draws air through itself while you're running the test. So you're measuring aerosols that are airborne. So in so doing, we can measure this and compare over the time that the patient was treated and see what the differences are. So it turns out HVE does help. So that's the middle picture with the control where neither one of these was in place. The middle picture is just HVE alone on the patient. But when we add extraoral to that, we saw as much as an 84% reduction in aerosol in the test, and 95% spatter, which is important because we're also trying to control that, especially from the hygienist or the dentist. So much like masks are a simple solution to reduce the aerosol spread at the source of a person, we're using these methods near the patient when we can't have a mask on them. So, and why we're so focused on this SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, we really need to be looking at airborne infection control in a more general sense, which is what the topic should be the focus of this whole this meeting today. Is we shouldn't roll back our progress as we figured out how to deal with this during the pandemic. And what eventually, hopefully, this pandemic will be on our rearview mirror, but that doesn't mean we should stop. We need to keep moving forward. Okay, so now what, and this is where we've already addressed this, because you're not going to ever get 100% of the aerosols at the patient. The goal was to get most of them as much as possible so that you don't have to deal with them in the space. But you can never spike the ball and say you're done. At that point, it's harder to deal with them once they get away from the patient. But we've already heard how you do that. So we use, by introducing fresh air, HVAC, germicidal UV, and air cleaners, portable air cleaners, to mop up and replace, clean, and sterilize the air. But often fresh air is not an option. Not everybody lives in 80-degree Southern California or 70-degree Southern California, so we're either heating or cooling that air. So, but HVAC is can still be a big part of that, because we can use it to filter the air at a lower level. But the simplest solution that you can do right now today has already been addressed, and that's these portable air cleaners. Sorry, can you go back one slide? Thank you. So in this diagram, we already dealt with some of the very specific requirements for air cleaners, but and I'm gonna collectively call those performance in this Venn diagram. And we really have 2 other things we're looking at, and that's noise and cost. So a unit that's really high in all 3 really doesn't exist. And you don't want to just order any random unit for $100 on Amazon. And we've already heard about there are specifications and testing regimens that will tell us which ones are acceptable and how much space they clean. So what we want to do is find a high performance unit that is low noise, because we need our quiet dental offices. We should only be hearing our dental tools and drills in the dental office, and otherwise dentist offices are quiet. So we got to have quiet air cleaners, and we want them quiet so that people are comfortable using them all the time. And this HEPA filtration is important because then we're always filtering down to the smallest particle size, capturing all these aerosols. And in air cleaners, UV lights and ionization are not proven technologies. And so we really need to stay away from those. As we've heard, UV elsewhere is a good solution, but air cleaner is not the space for it. So you can go to the next slide. So then this year we commissioned another study, again with dental advisors, to look at air cleaners in an actual dental office with actual patients being treated. And so again, we used the impactor throughout the day to measure the difference with and without air cleaners. So the two groups, one was when air cleaners were present and running, and one was when they weren't. And the floor plan was provided here, and each gold circle shows you where we dropped an air cleaner, because we needed to, again, determine how much airflow we needed to deal with the square footage, but also when there are barriers, that needs to factor in, and also where your air conditioning vents and returns are as far as airflows. You can improve the effectiveness of your air cleaners by placing them appropriately. So, and I should point out that while this office is there's a very big space there towards the bottom, those walls in between those are all operatories. They don't have full walls. So we still get airflow across the top, which allows that air cleaner and the air conditioning to move air, and it still work. So now we see the results, and the middle slide is the result of the culture with the air cleaners running during patient treatment. Now I should also point out that this is an actual running office, and it was running under state and local and guidelines, CDC guidelines. So there was nobody in the waiting room, and there were very few patients intentionally. So we would expect that if we reran this test with a normal population, with people in the waiting room and all the chairs full, which a busy dental office normally is, that we would see much higher levels in aerosols in the control, but also more significant drops when you use the air cleaners. So the raw numbers, this study was just completed. So the raw numbers are showing as much as 80% reduction in bioaerosols as measured in this experiment. Next slide. So, or I guess we lost a slide. I'll just address real quick. We talked about HVAC updates, and I'm just going to hit on it briefly because we've already spoken about it. Oftentimes, one thing that can be done, and this requires the HVAC specialty or consultants or environmental consultants to take a look, and that's you can add higher grade like MERV 13 filters. They're not as good as HEPA filtration, and they're not a complete solution, but that's one additional layer that you can do in addition to seeing if you can bring in outdoor air with your HVAC and just increasing the airflow. But I should point out that like the MERV 13, they're more like 50 to 75% filters compared to 99, virtually 100%, 99.97% for HEPA. But again, we're talking about layers of protection. So then it's important to know that or mention that there are some secondary benefits of this. We're spending a lot of time and effort to capture the, right now we're looking at we're at the tail end of this, or we hope we're the tail end of this pandemic. And so that's what we're so focused on. But there's a lot of secondary benefits, just indoor air quality, disease avoidance, as has already been addressed, with other illnesses and bacteria and such, and then outdoor air pollution. And then a lot of these air cleaners, you can add charcoal filters in in the unit as an option, and that can reduce some odors, volatile organic compounds, and other materials that are introduced in a variety of different ways. So overall, if you have staff in these spaces, adding these steps does more than just reduce, viruses and bacteria in the air. It creates a better work environment and a better environment for your patient. So the dental industry doesn't have its own set of guidelines, and this is not a good thing. The ADA defers to the CDC's guidance currently for air quality. Wearing masks is the #1 way to reduce the concentrations of these aerosols, but otherwise it boils down to the things we've been talking about today, and that's air movement, HEPA filtration, and filtration in general. But again, back to the beginning where we're trying to go forward, not backward. So what are our next steps? So we need to look at this as layers. It's a layered approach. So that they're in the center there, PPE. And again, everyone but the patient can be wearing a mask. And so that's the first easy step we can do. And then we have the extraoral and HVE for the patient. That's the next layer. Let's keep it from getting keep it from flooding, keep it from spreading. But if we're not going to catch it all, so the next layer is that in-room air purification, and then we have fresh air and HVAC. So we really, as an industry, we really need to play catch up. So my question to the industry and to you all today is, if we're not going to do this now, then when? If we're not at the tail end of a pandemic, and if we didn't learn our lesson, then when are we going to learn our lesson? So I think we need to start really putting these into play on a permanent basis, much like gloves and water and all the other things we do. This is an improvement that the dental industry needs to make, and I think now is the time. And thank you. Back to you, Nancy.